Okay, so good morning, everybody. And now we will start with first 3 bows to the Buddha. 1, 2, 3. And then we'll do the salutation. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Okay, so we'll be continuing our reading of the Anguttara Nikaya Book of Fours. And I'm not going to be doing every sutta, but moving to the more interesting suttas. But now we'll pick up with sutta number 193, which follows the sutta that I did in the last class. And I'm not going to do the sutta in its entirety because it's very similar to the famous Kalama Sutta, which is in the Book of Threes of the Anguttara Nikaya. I think it's the Threes, sutta number 65. And when we did the Book of Threes, then I explored that sutta in detail. But this sutta, the Bhaddhiya Sutta, has a somewhat different framework than the Kalama Sutta. In the Kalama Sutta, the people who are called the Kalamas come to the Buddha because they've heard, they're not disciples of the Buddha, but they've heard other teachers coming through their town, proclaiming their doctrine, praising their own doctrine to the sky, and knocking down and debunking and rejecting the teachings of the other teachers. And so the Kalamas were very confused, and then they came to the Buddha and said, which one is speaking truth? Which one is speaking falsely? And then the Buddha said, put all of those questions aside. It's right that you have doubts, right that you are confused. And then the Buddha gives them a method for finding the truth by themselves. And we're going to see the Buddha uses that same method here, that same approach, except as I said, the framework is different. The starting point is different. So here, the Buddha is living at Vesali, and the dominant clan in the city of Vesali were the people called the Lichavis. I think that they were probably a kind of Kshatriya, people of the administrative and warrior caste. And so one of them, named Bhaddhiya, comes to the Buddha, and this is what he hears. He's heard that the ascetic Gautama is a magician who knows a certain kind of magic by which he converts the disciples of teachers, of other teachers. And then he says, is this true or is this false? Because he doesn't want to misrepresent the Buddha. And so the Buddha, now because he's seemingly he's being pushed into a corner, he doesn't want to say that, certainly he's not going to say that I'm a magician and that I use a magic to convert the disciples of other teachers to my teaching. But also he doesn't want to try to reject this claim right off, because then it might appear to Bhaddhiya that he's being crafty and defensive. So he's going to teach Bhaddhiya a way by which he can find what's valuable and useful from the Dhamma for himself. And at this point, then he goes into the same kind of instruction that he gives to the Kalamas in the Kalama Sutta. So he says, do not go by oral tradition, by a lineage of famous teachers, by hearsay, by a collection of sacred texts, by logical reasoning, inference, reflection, the acceptance of a view after pondering it, by an impressive teacher, or because you think a particular ascetic is your teacher. But then he gives the essential advice: when you know for yourself these things are unwholesome, these things are blameworthy, these things are censored by the wise, these things lead to harm and suffering, then you should abandon them. So this is exactly the same instruction given to the Kalamas. And then he uses the same kind of question and answer approach that he uses when he's having this conversation with the Kalamas. So he frames it in terms, first, of the three unwholesome roots: greed, hatred, and delusion. So when those arise, do they lead to benefit or to harm? Of course, he says they lead to harm. And then the Buddha says that when a person is overcome by greed, hate, and delusion, then they will act in ways contrary to the basic principles of ethics: killing, stealing, committing adultery, speaking lies, and encouraging others to do likewise. So all of that is similar to the Kalama Sutta, except here we have one additional factor, which explains why this sutta is included in the Book of Fours. And that factor, it uses the Pali word. It's a rather unusual word, not very common. The word is saramba. Yeah, so this is the word that I've translated here as violence. Okay. And it's not a very common word, so let's see what the commentary has to say about it. Okay, so the commentary says, actually the commentary explanation, not very clear to me. It has the characteristic as uttarya, karana uttarya. Karana is doing, uttarya. I have to say the comment is not so clear to me, but I must have had some basis for translating it as violence. But anyway, so the Buddha is questioning Bhatia and getting him to see that whether it's greed, hatred, delusion, or violence, those states arising internally, even that alone will lead to harm rather than to benefit. And then a person who's overcome by greed, hatred, delusion, and violence will act in ethically reproachable ways, reprehensible ways: killing, stealing, adultery, and so forth. And so therefore, one should abandon those states. And then the Buddha I see that I referred to verses at 439 where aramba clearly means violence. Okay, and then the Buddha goes on to question Bhaddiya about non-greed, non-hatred, non-delusion, and non-violence, the good qualities, and those he gets him to confirm lead to welfare and happiness. Then the last part now, this is where we have a departure from the Kalama Sutta. So now the Buddha tells Bhaddiya that the good persons in the world, these are the wise people in the world, encourage their disciples to remove greed. And then when you remove greed, you will not do any actions born of greed through body, speech, or mind. You should continually remove hatred, remove delusion, remove violence. When you remove violence, you will not do any action born of violence, whether by speech, by body, speech, or mind. And then Bhaddiya then expresses his approval of the Buddha, and he declares that he goes for refuge to the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, and declares himself a lay follower who is gone for refuge for life. And so now the Buddha continues the questioning. This is in the new way. So he says, did I say to you, come Bhaddiya, be my disciple, and I will be your teacher? And Bhaddiya says, surely not. And then so you could see that the Buddha here has converted Bhaddiya, led him to his teaching, not through any kind of magical tricks, not through performing feats of psychic power, performing so-called miracles, but simply by questioning him, sort of to draw out what we might call the basic underlying fundamental ethical convictions that Bhaddiya already had assumed, and getting Bhaddiya to recognize those ethical convictions and see that these are the principles that the Buddha himself is proclaiming in his teaching. And what's interesting here is that the Buddha, this is like in the Kalama Sutta, the Buddha has not taught anything, any of the doctrines that are distinctive and unique to the Buddha, to the Buddha's teaching. He hasn't taught the Four Noble Truths. He didn't teach dependent origination. He didn't teach the three characteristics: impermanence, suffering, non-self. But he's kept the teaching at a very clear, direct, practical, and visible level, framing the teaching by way of questions, not even making positive statements, but simply asking questions to draw out the understanding from Bhaddiya himself. And the kind of understanding that he's drawing out is what I call this pragmatic, directly visible, ethical understanding. And so what the Buddha is saying is that a wise teacher will teach his disciples to remove greed, hatred, delusion, and violence. And yet, though the Buddha didn't declare anything distinctive of his own teaching, anything unique to his own teaching, but in a way, he sort of indirectly been leading Bhaddiya to the goal of his teaching. Because the goal of the Buddha's teaching, of course, is Nibbana. And in a number of suttas, Nibbana is said to be the destruction of greed or lust, the destruction of hatred, and the destruction of ignorance or delusion. So even though the injunction, the instruction to remove greed, remove hatred, remove delusion would be acceptable, reasonable, something that can be approved by any person with a very clear moral sense, a clear sense of conscience. But when you carry that principle of removing greed, hatred, and delusion to its ultimate conclusion, what you wind up with is moving in the direction of Nibbana, the final, the ultimate goal of the Buddha Dharma. Okay, so when the Buddha says this, then Bhatia goes on and says, excellent is that converting magic. Here, the Buddha's converting magic is not using so-called miracles and supernatural feats, but the simple method of using questions, posing questions in order to appeal to the disciples or the potential disciples' inherent moral sense. And so Bhatia now says that excellent is that converting magic, good is that converting magic. If my relatives and family members were to be converted by this conversion, that would lead to their welfare and happiness. If all the kshatriyas, that's the warriors and princes, were to be converted in this way, if all the Brahmins, the Vaishyas, the Sudras were to be converted in this way, that would lead to their welfare and happiness for a long time. And then the Buddha explains why that is so. Because if all the kshatriyas would be converted by this conversion, they would be sort of moving towards the abandoning of unwholesome qualities, unwholesome states of mind, and developing and acquiring wholesome qualities, wholesome states of mind. And that is what would lead to their welfare and happiness for a long time. So it's the abandoning of unwholesome qualities, whether mental states like greed, hatred, and delusion, or the unwholesome actions like killing, stealing, sexual misconduct, and acquiring the wholesome qualities that would be the good mental qualities of generosity, loving kindness, and wisdom, and nonviolence, and the actions that flow from them. Not killing, not stealing, no sexual misconduct, no lying. And then it goes on and on. So even if the world with this Devas, Mara, and Brahma, this population with all of its living beings would be converted by this conversion towards the abandoning of unwholesome qualities and acquiring wholesome qualities, that would lead to the welfare and happiness of the world for a long time. And then the Buddha says, if even these great sal trees, the sal tree is a kind of tree that grows in South Asia, a large towering tree. Even if these great trees here in North America, we might say these oak trees would be converted, or these redwood trees in California would be converted by this conversion, that would lead to the welfare and happiness even of these great redwood trees for a long time. How much more than for a human being? Okay, I just wanted to deal rather briefly with this sutta because I want to pay more attention to the next sutta, which is a rather interesting one, and it also raises some, maybe we could call these scholar questions that would be of interest to scholars of the early Buddhist texts. And this is a sutta now, it's spoken by the Venerable Ananda. So the Venerable Ananda is living among the Kolians near a town called Sapuga. And the Kolians were actually the state a little bit to the south of the Sakyan Republic in ancient India. And the Kolians were the family or the community from which the Buddha's mother came. So even though the Buddha was a Sakyan, because his father was a Sakyan, but on his mother's side, he was a Kolian. So he was born from the marriage of a Sakyan, his father, Prince Suddhodana, and his mother, Mahamaya, who was a Kolian. Okay, then a number of young Kolians come to the Venerable Ananda, and they sit to one side, probably expecting a teaching. And now the Venerable Ananda says to them, and then this is interesting, he says that there are these 4 factors of striving for purity that the Blessed One, that's the Buddha who knows and sees, has rightly expounded for the purification of beings, for the overcoming of sorrow and lamentation, for the passing away of pain and displeasure or dejection, for the achievement of the right method, for the realization of Nibbana. Do those phrases seem familiar to anybody? Have you seen that formula before?
Mahasatipatthana.
Satipatthana.
Yeah, again and again we see this in the Satipatthana Sutta. So it's that same particular formula, but now it's applied to a different set of factors, not to the 4 Satipatthanas, but something called, it's a rather long compound, and it can be resolved in various ways. So we could look at the compound. So we have Parisuddhi, Padaniya, and Anga. So Anga means a factor. In plural, it's Angani. And Padaniya is an adjective based on, it's actually a future passive participle based on the word Padana, which means striving. And then Parisuddhi means purity or purification. So I translated the compound in accordance with the way the commentary explains it as factors of striving for the purpose of purity or purification. And here we find that it's said that that there are these 4 factors of striving for purity, which the Buddha has rightly expounded. But what's a bit puzzling is that if you do a search using the Tripitaka to search for these 4 factors of purification, of striving for purification, let's do that search. We'll take only the canonical text, not the commentaries, no other texts. I put in a wildcard search. And we get only one, whoops. We get reference to it in only one sutta, this one. So even though Ananda has said that the Buddha has rightly expounded these 4 factors of striving for purity, we don't find them formulated exactly in these words anywhere within the sutta collection directly ascribed to the Buddha. We find them only here. And first, okay, let's go on and see what the 4 factors of striving for purity are. We have the factor of striving for purity of sila. Yeah, so this is called sila parisuddhi padani anga. So the factor of striving for purity of virtuous behavior or good behavior. And the factor of striving for, the next one is Chitta Parisuddhi Padanayanga, the factor of striving for purity of mind. The next one is in Pali, Ditti Parisuddhi Padanayanga, which we translate the factor of striving for purity of view. And next we have the Vimutti Parisuddhi Padanayanga, which we translate the factor of striving for purity of liberation. Sounds like a rather odd expression. Okay, and now, okay, let me just continue. Now, though we don't find these four factors of striving for purity elsewhere in the canon, or we don't find them elsewhere in the Sutta Pitaka, we do find a sutta in the Majjhima Nikaya. This is sutta number 24. It's called the Rattavinita Sutta, the sutta on the relay of chariots, which lay out a scheme of 7 Visuddhis. The word used there is Visuddhi. And so in the first case, and first the setting for the sutta. Yeah, the sutta itself is not expounded by the Buddha himself, but the sutta begins when the Buddha is praising a monk by the name of Puna Mantani Putta. And Sariputta is in the audience, and Puna is not there. But Sariputta, when he hears Puna Mantani Putta being praised by the Buddha, Sariputta thinks, I would like to meet this Puna sometime and have some conversation with him. And then on a later occasion, Sariputta runs across the monk Puna, and he knows that this monk is Puna Mantani Putta, but Puna Mantani Putta has never seen Sariputta before, and Sariputta doesn't reveal his identity. He just starts engaging in a conversation with Puna. He says, are you a disciple of the Buddha Gautama Buddha, who comes from the Sakyan clan? And Puna says, yes, I am. And then Sariputta starts questioning him. What is the final goal of the teaching taught by the ascetic named Gautama? And then Puna says, the final goal is final nibbana without clinging. And then Sariputta questions him about different practices, stages of practice. And Puna keeps on saying that the final goal is not purification of virtue, not purification of mind, not purification of you, and so on. But all of those purifications are stages in the process for arriving at the goal of final nibbana without clinging. So then at the end of the conversation, I think it's Sariputta who's summing up. I don't remember whether this was Sariputta or Puna speaking, but purification of virtue is for the sake of reaching purification of mind. Purification of mind leads to purification of you, purification of you. Now we have some new factors here. So you see, purification of virtue, purification of mind, purification of view. These three we find expressed somewhat differently in the sutta that we're now discussing from the Anguttara Nikaya. But then we have some new items introduced. purification by overcoming doubt, purification by knowledge and vision of what is the path and what is not the path, purification by knowledge and vision of the practice, and then purification by knowledge and vision. And then purification by knowledge and vision is for the sake of reaching final nibbana without clinging. So we have here the standard list of 7 purifications, and 3 of them correspond to the 4 factors of striving for purity in the sutta from the Anguttara Nikaya. We have one new factor introduced here, the factor of striving for purity of liberation. So this is a new factor. Okay, then continuing, in the Digha Nikaya, at the very end of the Digha Nikaya, there is a sutta called the Dasuttara Sutta, which is spoken by Sariputta as a way of summarizing the Buddha's teaching in various numerical groups. So he starts off with a set of 1s, then comes to 2s, sets of 3s, sets of 4s, and so on. And then at a later point, he arrives at sets of 9s, groups of 9 items. And here he enumerates 9 factors of striving for purity. In the 4s, we don't find the 4 factors of striving for purity, but rather it's only when we come to the 9s that we find 9 factors of striving for purity. And when we look at them, this is quite interesting. The first 7 correspond to the 7 stages of purity in the Ratta Vinita Sutta. Yeah, here I put in the Pali, because I just copied this out of the Pali text. So we have the factor of striving for purification, of purity of good behavior, then purity of mind, purity of view, but then continuing the purity of overcoming doubt, purity of knowledge and vision of what is the path and not path, purification by knowledge and vision of the practice or the way, and then purification by knowledge and vision. So here we have these as factors for purification of the 7 kinds of purity in the in the Relay of Chariots Sutta. But here, because we have 9 factors, so we have 2 new factors added, which are rather strange. At least one of them a little strange. We have Panya Visuddhi, that is the factor of striving for the purification of purity of wisdom. And I say this is strange because usually throughout the suttas, knowledge and vision, that's jnana dasana, and panya or wisdom are pretty much treated as just synonyms, just different expressions for the same thing. So it's a question, why does the text introduce wisdom as something separate from knowledge and vision? And then as the 9th purification, we have purification of liberation, which corresponds to the 4th kind of striving for purity in the sutta from the Anguttara Nikaya. So when we look at these 9 stages of purity, 9 types of 9 factors of striving for purification, we could see that we have 7 correspond to the Ratta Vinita Sutta, to Majjhima Nikaya number 24. 4 of them correspond to our Anguttara Nikaya Sutta, that is Book of Fours, number 194, and then one that's just, that seems a little bit arbitrary, that's been added in a little bit of an arbitrary way, the striving for purity of wisdom. Okay, so these are the 9 kinds of purification. Okay, now let us see how these factors of striving for purification are explained in this sutta spoken by Ananda. Okay, so first we have the factor of striving for purity of sila, of good behavior, virtuous behavior. And so how is that defined? First, we have to define the factor, what is meant by virtuous behavior. So the text uses the sort of stock definition of sila in relation to the monastic. So we can go up to Sutta 181. Okay, so here the monk is virtuous. He follows the code of monastic rules, the patimokkha. He possesses good conduct and a suitable resort, seeing danger in minute faults. Then having undertaken the training rules, he trains in them. So that is the purity of sila, of virtuous conduct. But then to make it a factor of striving for purity, we have some additional factors. So that is called the purity of virtuous behavior. And then the desire, effort, zeal, enthusiasm, indefatigability, mindfulness, and clear comprehension, applied with the intention that I will fulfill my purity of virtuous behavior and so forth in various ways. That is the factor of striving for purity of virtuous behavior. Okay, so the strivings of purity of virtuous behavior is explained by these, let's say, by this stock definition of a monastic person's good behavior. Okay, then what is the factor of striving for purity of mind? So first, what is purity of mind? And then it's defined by the formula, the standard formula for the 4 jhanas. Secluded from sensual pleasures and unwholesome states of mind, the monk enters and dwells in the 1st, 2nd, 3rd, and 4th jhana, and then that effort, desire, and so on, with the intention of purifying one's mind, that is the factor of striving for purity of mind. Okay, then we have the factor of striving for purity of view. And then here we have this purity of view is defined by a standard formula, again, another standard formula that the monk understands as it really is. This is dukkha, suffering. This is the origin of dukkha. This is the cessation of dukkha. This is the way leading to the cessation of dukkha. So that is called purity of view. And then the effort, determination, the desire, zeal, accompanied by mindfulness and clear comprehension with the intention of fulfilling purity of view. That is the factor of striving for purity of view. Okay, then the factor of striving for purity of liberation. So first, what is purity of liberation? So the noble disciple possessing this purity of virtuous behavior, purity of mind, purity of view, then detaches his mind from the things that cause attachment and emancipates his mind through the things that bring emancipation. So the things that cause attachment, those would be the things that are the basis for raga, for lust. And so to detach the mind from those things means, in effect, we could say, the achievement of viraga. That is, the viraga is dispassion or the fading out of attachment. So to gain this purity of liberation, one has to cause the fading out of this raga, this lust or attachment. And then one has to emancipate the mind through the things that bring emancipation. And we could say that the things that bring emancipation, maybe we could say the 7 factors of enlightenment. Let's see if the commentary gives a gloss on this. Yeah, the commentary just says, through whatever objects the mind is to be emancipated, just in such a way one emancipates it through them. And then the commentary explains the fading out of lust as the attainment of the path, the world transcending path. And then at the moment of the fruit, the mind is said to be detached from lust. And then it says, he thereby reaches right liberation. This is in Pali, it's sama vimutti. And then the commentary explains this right liberation as the fruit of arhatship. Let's get a note on this. So it's explaining he reaches right liberation. So it says through the right cause or method, he reaches through knowledge the liberation, which is the fruition of arhatship. So that's the purity of liberation. And then the desire, effort, enthusiasm, and so on to reach that purity of liberation, that is called the factor of striving for purity of liberation. So Ananda concludes that these are the 4 factors of striving for purity that the Blessed One, the Buddha, has rightly expounded for the purification of beings and so on. Okay, so maybe we could look and see if we have any questions. So if you have any questions, then please feel welcome to use the hand device to raise your hand. Okay, so I see V has raised your hand.
Yes, yes. Good morning, Bante.
Good morning.
In regards to this sutta, is this corresponds with normally what the Mahayana would say about sila, which is jit, and mind to stabilize the mind thing, and
Wait,
view.
your voice is a bit low. Maybe can you move closer to the,
Yes. In regards to this sutta,
yeah.
normally I think that it corresponds with what the Mahayana would say, that is sila as jie and mind as thing and view as hui, and finally you go for the su jing nie pan. Is that how the Mahayana reconstruct their suttas based or the concept based on this
Yeah.
rather than the Eightfold Path?
Wait. The last one is what in
Is
Chinese?
Su Jing Nie Pan. When you
Suqing.
Su Jing Nie Pan, you go into Nibbana.
Suqing. What is Suqing?
Su Jing is very, you go into samadhi, very, very, very still, and that you get into Nibbana.
Oh,
Is this how the
yeah.
Mahayana would have
No, I
recon?
don't. I don't think we would say that this that sequence is a innovation of the Mahayana. I would say that those terms have been taken, sort of been incorporated into Mahayana from the influence of the early Buddhist teaching. Because especially the Indian Mahayana didn't just sort of pop up out of, in thin air, but it built upon the foundational teachings of early Buddhism. And so in early Buddhism, we always have the sequence, in fact, the very common sequence of sila, samadhi, and panya and vimutti. Like if we go to the very beginning of the Book of Fours, let's just get to the beginning. Okay, here the Buddha is addressing the monks and he says that because of not penetrating four things, we've wandered for a long time in the samsara. What are the four things? It's noble, virtuous behavior, noble concentration, noble wisdom, and noble liberation. So here we have the sequence of sila, samadhi, panya, and vimutti. And then sometimes when we have the three trainings, then concentration is replaced by mind. So that's what becomes shin in Chinese. So sila is, of course, jia. Concentration is either ding or as mind, shin. And wisdom is wei. And then here we have liberation, which would be jieto, but maybe sometimes su jing nibbana, nibbana. Yeah, so it's not an innovation of the Mahayana, but it's just what the Mahayana has absorbed from the early teachings. Is that
And
clear? Yeah.
yes, I have one more question regarding the Eightfold Path. So should we follow the Eightfold Path? I mean, the way or the one that you just mentioned about the seven Visuddhi.
Well,
So
actually, the two are not exclusive. Let's take a look at the seven Visuddhis and relate them to the Eightfold Path. Okay, so we have here a purification of virtue. So in the Eightfold Path, we have right speech, right action, right livelihood. So that would go under purification of virtue. Then purification of mind is explained as in the sutta that we just read, explained as the four jhanas. So that corresponds to the samma samadhi of the Noble Eightfold Path. And to reach right samadhi, you need mindfulness, and right effort. And so in purification of mind, we could say you have right effort, right mindfulness, and right concentration. Then purification of view, and actually all of the other factors that follow this, from purification of view down to purification by knowledge and vision, would correspond to, this could be seen as an elaboration of right view in the Noble Eightfold Path. Yeah, so it doesn't matter how you formulate it, whether as the 8 factors of the Noble Eightfold Path, the training in Sila, Samadhi, and Panya, or the 7 purifications, it's basically the same path.
Okay, thank you. The number 9 would have been the right wisdom, and number 10 would be the right liberation, right? So effectively, we have 10-fold path rather than 8-fold path. Am I right?
We'd say,
because the 8-fold path is stopped at the right samadhi.
yeah.
So can it be the 9th step as well, the right wisdom, as well as the 10th, which is the right liberation?
Yeah. Though we would say probably what's called the right wisdom and right liberation are not really so much factors of the path, but the results of the path. So what you do is to practice the 8 factors of the Eightfold Noble Path. And when those factors come to maturity, then they naturally issue in right wisdom or right liberation, or right wisdom and right liberation.
Okay, so basically it's the same as the fruit or arhatship.
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Bante. Yes.
Okay, now we come to Anfeng.
Thank you, Bante. Bante, I'm a bit confused with the order of the purification of sila, little mind, little view, little liberation. I just wonder, would it possible? I mean, shouldn't it be purification of mind first before we can take up on sila?
I think I see what you mean. Yeah, but remember, what's meant by purification of mind is the achievement of the jhanas, the 4 jhanas. Let me just find the sutta. Okay, so what is meant by purity of mind here? So here it says the practitioner enters and dwells in the 4 jhanas. Yeah. So the practice of samadhi, successful practice of samadhi, of meditation, and the attainment of the jhanas depends on the purity of the behavior, on good behavior. But in order to undertake good behavior, you need good intentions. So maybe that's why you think purity of mind comes before pure or virtuous behavior, because you need virtuous intentions before you can undertake the precepts. But it's by following purity of virtuous behavior that you purify one's conduct, and then that purity of conduct serves as the basis for success in the meditation practice, which results in the achievement of purity of mind. Does that make it clear?
Yeah, Bante, sorry, I think I misunderstood, saying my question is like purity of view first before sila, not of mind.
I see. Yeah, okay, that's an interesting question, because in the explanation of the Noble Eightfold Path, we get right view comes first, followed by right purpose or right intention. Then come the 3 sila factors: right speech, right action, right livelihood. Whereas in this presentation, we get virtuous behavior, good behavior, then samadhi as purity of mind, then purity of view. I think this is because in the Buddha's exposition of the Noble Eightfold Path, he intends the right view there to be what I call the preliminary right view, the conceptual right view, the intellectual understanding of the Four Noble Truths, which becomes a sort of guide for the practice. And then the right intention, samma sankappa, becomes the motivation for the practice. Then one enters the training in virtuous conduct through right speech, right action, right livelihood, the training in purity of mind through samadhi. And then based on samadhi, one develops insight. And that insight brings the experiential realization of the Four Noble Truths. And that is what is meant by purity of view here. This is not just the preliminary right view that guides one in practicing the path, but this is the direct realization of the Four Noble Truths, which is equivalent to the attainment of stream entry. Is that clear?
This is perfect. Thank you, Bhante. Wonderful.
Okay. Then we have Chua Ani.
Yes, Bhante, thank you. Bhante, I actually was wondering whether the things that bring emancipation, which you say would mean the 7 factors of enlightenment, can they also refer to the other sets in the 37 factors of enlightenment as well? And the other question I have is that how do these correspond to the 4 stages of enlightenment? This purification, how does it correspond to the Sotapan and Sakadagami and the rest? Yes, thank you, Bhante.
Okay, first let's take the first question. If you remember, I said when explaining the factors that lead to emancipation, the factors that bring emancipation, I said, for example, the 7 factors of enlightenment, or I said we could take as an example. So I just took them as one example, but you could take any of the groups within the 37 aids to enlightenment. So you could say it could be the 4 foundations of mindfulness, could be the 5 faculties, could be the Noble Eightfold Path, but I just took for convenience, just for one example, the 7 factors of enlightenment. Okay, then the second question, how do these purities relate to the 4, let's say the 4 stages of realization? So it would seem that purity of view as the direct experiential understanding of the 4 Noble Truths, that this would be at minimum, this is accomplished with the attainment of stream entry. So this purity of view could be achieved, or could signify the attainment of stream entry, once returning or non-returning. So this would maybe correspond to the lower 3 stages of realization. And then the purity of liberation would be the attainment of arhatship. So is that clear?
Yes, thank you, Bhante.
Okay, and then next is Ditta Dhamma.
Wandami Bhante.
Okay, go ahead.
Bhante, regarding in the Tipitaka, they mentioned about this talk. Pamoja litwa piti, pasadi, suka, samadhi, yata bhutanya dasana.
Yeah.
Then nibida, viraga, vimuchati. How this thing link fit toward this 4 striving effort? I mean the nibida, especially the part that nibida lead toward viraga. How this thing match today discussion, particularly about this sutta, Bhante? Could you explain it on this, please? Thank you.
Yeah, there's not a perfect match because that sequence. Okay, so it's usually it starts with, it might start, one version starts with saddha, with faith, then it goes to Pamoja, Piti, Pasadi. Yeah, so those would say that those are all sort of contributing factors. So it doesn't mention, that sequence doesn't, well, some of them do mention observing the precepts. There are some versions which mention observance of the precepts. And then you get Pamoja, Piti, Pasadi, and so on. So after the precepts, then the factors beginning with Pamoja, that's joy, and Piti, delight, up to Samadhi. Yeah, so that would correspond to purity of mind. Then after Samadhi, then you have Jnana Dasana, Yata Bhuta Jnana Dasana. That would correspond to purity of view. And then the stages after that, Nibbida, Viraga, and Vimutti, would correspond, I think, to the, or at least will culminate in the purity of liberation.
Okay.
Yeah, but they're not an exact fit, because some schemes go into greater detail in certain respects than other schemes. So it's not like a one-to-one fit. Okay, the next question is Tian Xiong.
Thank you, Bante. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.
Okay, Tian Xiong.
Morning, Bante.
Good morning.
In regards to purification of views, Bante mentioned is the achievements of the Four Noble Truths, meaning the achievements of enlightenment. But on the number 5 purification is the path and non-path. Isn't it this before the stage of enlightenment? Because they haven't gone into the realization of the correct path yet. So this is more in the preliminary stage of understanding what I call a purification of view, in the sense that they understand the nama and rupa, and also the 3 characteristics. Thank you, Bante.
Yeah, this is an interesting point. I thought that if there was more time, I would elaborate on this. But there seems to be a difference between the way the 7 purifications are treated in the Abhidharma and the original meaning of the 7 purifications, as I understand them, and some other schools of early Buddhism interpreted the 7 purifications. Okay, so, whoops. So if maybe some of you attended my Abhidharma program last weekend, where I went through these 7 stages of purification according to the Visuddhimagga system. So here we have do you see the outline of the 7 purifications?
Yes, Bante.
Okay, so here we have purification of view is explained as understanding Namarupa, the material and mental phenomena. Then overcoming doubt is understanding the conditionality. Then we have knowledge of what is the path and not path. And then we have knowledge and vision of the way as the various insight knowledges. And then knowledge and vision as the knowledge of the 4 supermundane, world transcending paths. Okay, so this is the way the Theravada commentarial tradition, culminating in the Visuddhimagga, explains the 7 purifications. But it occurred to me, I had collected some texts. Let's see if we could fit these in 5 minutes. Okay, so here we have, I just copied from the Pali, so I'll have to translate on the spot. So what I would take to be the purification of view in the sutta view. So this is the Samaditi Sutta, Majjhima Nikaya Sutta number 9, and it's Sariputta speaking, and he says that when a noble disciple understands suffering, dukkha, the origin of dukkha, the cessation of dukkha, and the path to cessation, at that point, the noble disciple is one of right view, whose view is straight, who has unshaken confidence in the Dhamma. That's a characteristic of a stream enterer, one who has reached this true Dhamma, this good Dhamma. So these are terms that describe at least a stream enterer. So the stream enterer here has the knowledge of the Four Noble Truths, and it is that knowledge or understanding of that experiential knowledge of the Four Noble Truths that in our Anguttara Nikaya Sutta is explained as purity of view. So I take it that the original meaning of purity of view was the knowledge that marks one as a stream enterer. Okay, then continuing another text I had. Okay, so here, this is from a sutta in the Digha Nikaya, number 3. So the Buddha, when he knows, he's speaking to a Brahmin named Pokarasati. And so when he knows that Pokarasati's mind is free from the hindrances, it's become clear and malleable, then the Buddha expounds the Four Noble Truths. He explains dukkha, its origin, cessation, and the path. And then it's said that while the Brahmin was listening to this, in that same seat, there arose in him the dust-free, stainless eye of Dhamma. Whatever is subject to arising is subject to cessation. So it seems that here, the Brahmin is getting the knowledge of the Four Noble Truths, experiential knowledge, and that's the Dhamma Chakku, the eye of Dhamma. And so this I take to be the original, to be identical with the achievement of purity of view. Then as for the next purity is the purity of overcoming doubt. And to me, that seems to be, okay, at the moment when the disciple hears and penetrates the Four Noble Truths, that's purity of view. And then the mind becomes free of doubt or overcomes doubt. So the text goes on to say, just then, that is, the Brahmin Pokarasati was one who had seen the Dhamma, reached the Dhamma, understood the Dhamma, had penetrated the Dhamma, and he had crossed over doubt, was rid of questioning or uncertainty, and he had gained full confidence in the teacher, in the Buddha's teaching. So this seems to be, this is what follows from seeing the Four Noble Truths, and this is the overcoming of doubt. And so I take this to be the original meaning of purification by overcoming doubt. And again, another sutta, this is in the Samyutta Nikaya, number 24, that when the noble disciple has seen some truths, then his doubt about dukkha has been abandoned. His doubt about the origin of dukkha has been abandoned. I'm sorry, when for the noble disciple, doubt about suffering has been abandoned, doubt about its origin, cessation, and the path have been abandoned, then he is a stream enterer bound for enlightenment. Okay, so that is the purification by overcoming doubt. Then probably what happens, the way I understand it, that when the disciple has overcome doubt, then he no longer has any uncertainty about what is the true path, what is the wrong path. Then his knowledge and vision of the practice is continuing with the practice to go from stream entry to arhatship. And then the purification by knowledge and vision would be the achievement of that knowledge and vision that brings the fruit of arhatship. Yeah, so I think the original meaning of these 7 purifications was maybe different from the way it's elaborated within the commentarial tradition. Yeah, this would take a long sort of scholarly study, but we don't have time for that right now. So we're going to have to end the session here. And I just want to mention, let's see, I had a few things to announce. So we'll have the class again next week. Next week will be December 18th. And then Venerable Mangala he's come back to Twangyan Monastery, and he will be conducting the group meditation on Sunday evening. That will be from 7 to 8 p.m. the chanting and meditation, and then probably from 8 to 8:30, he will handle some questions and answers. So if you're free on Sunday, then please join, do the same, it's the same Zoom link. Join us on Sunday. Okay, and then I will have the meditation, the group meditation again next Wednesday. Okay, so let us just end with a quick sharing of the merits, and thank you for joining. Akasa ta chabumata deva naga mahidika punyantang anumoditva chirangra kantu sasanang. Akasa ta chabumata deva naga mahidika punyantang anumoditva chirangra kantu desanang. Akasa ta chabumata deva naga mahidika punyantang anumoditva chirang rakantu mang parang pavagupadaya vichihetato etantare satakayupapanna rupya rupicha sanya sanino dukkha pamuchantu pusantu nibuting. And then we end with 3 bows to the Buddha. 1, 2, 3.
And a bow to Bhante. Yes, Carolyn.
Okay. Okay, thank you so much for joining again.
Thank you, Bhante.
Sadhu,
Thank you, Bhante.
Thank you, Bhante.
Thank you, Bhante.
You had a wonderful day, Bhante.
Okay, thank you.
Bhante.
Okay.
Wonderful extended birthday weekend.
Sadhu, sadhu.
Okay.
Don't leave, Bhante.
You live long, Bhante.
Okay, thank you.
Live long. Enjoy good health, Bhante.
Okay, thank you.
Good
Okay.
health.
Well, happy.
Have happiness.
Okay, we're going to have to go now.
Bye.
Happy birthday,
Okay,
Bhante.
Bye, Bhante.